Hello and welcome to Our American States, a podcast from the National Conference of State Legislatures. This podcast is all about legislatures, the people in them, the policies, process, and politics that shape them. I'm your host, Ed Smith.
If you want to be physically fit, you need to train and practice. And in the same way, if you want to be thoughtfully fit, if you want to handle yourself thoughtfully, handle your challenges thoughtfully, you need to train and practice. It doesn't just happen.
That was Darcy Luoma, CEO of Darcy Luoma Coaching and Consulting. She'll be speaking to the Legislative Staff Breakfast at NCSL's Legislative Summit in Indianapolis in August. Before founding her consulting business, Luoma had extensive experience working on Capitol Hill, working on 2 presidential campaigns, and as a senior advisor to a governor. She's also worked with state legislators and staff. Luoma discussed her thoughtfully fit approach, how it can help legislative staff and the rest of us cope with stress. She also talked about resilience in the face of trauma and tragedy in her own life that helped her hone these coping skills. Here's our discussion. Darcy, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here today, Ed.
You'll be speaking at NCSL's Legislative Summit in August in Indianapolis. To start, I wonder if you could give listeners an idea of your background and your path to where you are today.
I'm happy to. I actually started my career like the first 20 years in politics and working in the government and for campaigns. I worked for 2 governors and a U.S. senator and did advance for a couple of presidential campaigns. So I was working for Herb Kohl, running his office when he announced he was retiring. He announced in 2012. That's when I hired a coach to figure out what was next for me. And she helped me to clear away all the internal trash talk and, those saboteurs and help me identify my true passion, which was to start my own business doing coaching and consulting. So I've been doing that for the last 10 years. And in that role, I've coached a lot of legislative staffers and senators and state legislators. So I've got a long history and background. As a matter of fact, I attended my first NCSL conference back in the early 90s when I was working for a state public policy organization.
Talk a little bit about this thoughtfully fit approach, how this pause, think, act approach works.
Yeah, so Thoughtfully Fit was the model that I developed after taking, it was probably about 5 years doing a deep dive research on what are the top hurdles that get in the way of peak performance, whether, personally or professionally. And what I started to notice, Ed, is that every person, every client that came into a coaching conversation had similar challenges that they would bring in. And so after coaching thousands of people for the last 19 years, we researched and found that there are 6 main obstacles and hurdles that get in the way of peak performance. Those 6 hurdles became the 6 practices of Thoughtfully Fit. And it's a metaphor for if you want to be physically fit, you need to train and practice. And in the same way, if you want to be thoughtfully fit, if you want to handle yourself thoughtfully, handle your challenges thoughtfully, you need to train and practice. It doesn't just happen.
I was a longtime marathon runner when I was younger, so I appreciate the need to stay fit. But I also know that sometimes things happen that can be difficult to get past. You had a particularly traumatic event in your life, and I wonder if you could talk about that, and also if you can talk about the nature of resilience and how you explored that in the aftermath of this event.
Absolutely. I mean, what's ironic, Ed, I don't know if that's the right word, but crazy, is that after all of that research, we developed Thoughtfully Fit. The model officially came to life in March of 2016. I hired a PR firm and a marketing consultant to help us put it out into the world in a big way. And we were so excited. And then 5 days later, I got a phone call from my neighbor telling me that there were 50 police cars and a SWAT team and officers surrounding my house. And I wasn't home at the time. And it turns out that my husband, it was the day before our 10-year wedding anniversary. My husband was a full-time stay-at-home dad to our 2 young daughters. He was arrested for sexual assault of a minor. And he was put in jail that night and he did not come home. He ultimately was sentenced to federal prison for 10 years, and it turned my world completely upside down. And to talk about resilience, I mean, I define resilience as being able to come through adversity and obstacles, whether big or small, and come out the other side stronger. When my husband was arrested, I didn't think I'd ever get out of it. I never thought I'd smile again. I certainly wasn't thinking about resilience and, how I could navigate this. And the charges were so severe, I had to hire my own attorney. And my attorney said, Darcy, don't talk to anybody about anything. So in my worst moment, I became ground zero to test drive this brand new market model that we had just put out in the marketplace, and having to be able to practice, pausing. The core of Thoughtfully Fit is to pause, think, and then act. Having to practice that in my own life in an extreme way. And luckily, because I had been training and practicing, for a long time, I had a strong core. So I was able to navigate that and get to the other side where I'm talking to you about it today.
Beyond even your own trauma at dealing with this, you also had children that you needed to take care of. I've talked to people in the past who've had terrible things happen in their lives, and it's always interesting the degree to which children often pull us through, because we recognize the absolute necessity of, no matter how much we want to stay in bed for the rest of our lives, that we absolutely have to move, we have to take action. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. If I didn't have my daughters as motivation to do the work and the therapy and to work through this, I don't know whether I would have had the strength and fortitude, resilience. But you're 100% right. Those girls needed me now more than ever. They had never gone to bed at night without their dad reading them a bedtime story and making breakfast for them. And so at that moment, I had a choice to make, and it wasn't easy, but I'll tell you what, and even I hired a crisis communications firm because my consulting business is built on reputation. And I was very scared that this was all over the news media and social media and the newspaper. And I was really scared. And so I actually ended up sending my daughters to another state, to Minnesota, to live with my sister during the immediate aftermath for the couple months, because we had media trucks out front, and it was pretty intense for a while. And I remember the crisis communicator saying to me, Darcy, you can do what's right, or you can do what's easy. The right thing to do right now is to protect your girls and to make the best decisions for them, which was so hard because all of a sudden I went from living my life to husband's gone, house is destroyed by a search warrant, and now my daughters are gone. And then I took a leave from my business to deal with the aftermath and filing a divorce and dealing with trying to get all my confiscated computers and everything back. And so it really turned my world just completely upside down. But to your original question, I absolutely knew and made a choice that I was going to get through it for my girls.
As I looked over the information on your website and the description of your pause, think, act approach, I started thinking about how I respond. And I think I start with the think phase. How do you get somebody like me to take this 3-step approach?
Well, it's interesting you say that, Ed, because people listening probably will recognize that they also have a default. So it sounds like your default, your strength is the think, but our strengths taken to the extreme can become a weakness. So you overthink and you ruminate and you get analysis paralysis. So the key is to do all 3 in order. And so some people really have a hard time pausing. And, they just jump right into action. And unfortunately, that means, or can mean, that you overreact, and impulsively fire off an email or hit reply all. Other people are really good at thinking and being able to explore the situation from multiple perspectives, but then overthink and get analysis paralysis and never actually go have that tough conversation they've been ruminating on. The people who are good at pausing, that's their strength, but it might turn into a 5-hour Netflix binge of avoidance. The key is, I'll give a sample for each of those, and in that I'll share for you. If you have a hard time pausing, I always say there's something I do called the pause pinch, where you can put up your left hand like the shape of an L, and then take the thumb and forefinger of your right hand and pinch the webbing in between your other. And I call this the pause pinch. And if you find that there's a constituent that's come into the office and is angry, or there's a lobbyist that has called and is chewing you out, and you're having a hard time pausing to get off of autopilot, you can pinch there and take a breath and count to 3. And that can be just enough to get you off of autopilot, to pause, to then think, and to ask yourself some questions. Now, this is your strength, as you talked about, Ed. Try on different perspectives and create some new awareness. But then the key is you have to make a decision and take some action. You can't just keep thinking and thinking and overthinking. So that's what's critical then, is at some point, and sometimes you can decide yourself, okay, I'm going to give myself a day to think about this, or I'm going to think about it, and then by the end of the day, talk to my colleagues to tell them what my plan is, so that there's some kind of accountability you have, that you move forward and take action.
Thanks, Darcy. We'll be right back with the rest of our conversation after this short break.
Join your colleagues August 14th through the 16th in Indianapolis for the 2023 NCSL Legislative Summit, featuring an MVP lineup of speakers, including Peyton Manning, strategic futurist Nancy Giordano, HGTV star Mina Starcia-Klock, WNBA legend Tamika Catchings, the first female NFL coach Jen Welter, the founder of the History Makers Juliana Richardson, and Cedric King, a decorated veteran who defied the odds to run the Boston Marathon on artificial legs. Don't miss out on this opportunity to hear from these and other policy experts. Save your seat today for this must-attend conference by registering at ncsl.org.
This group of people you'll be speaking with in Indianapolis. These legislative staff jobs can be very high stress, particularly when legislatures are in session. How does this approach help in those stressful situations?
Oh, it's essential. I mean, when there's a high stress situation, if you can train yourself, and that's why I say it takes training, and you have to do it over and over again. You have to practice to the pause, think, act in the small things so that it becomes more natural in the big things. Well, you're a marathon runner. You can't do a marathon and then say, oh, I'm fit the rest of my life. After the marathon's done and you celebrate and you heal and recover, you need to keep training and practicing to stay fit. It's the same way with being thoughtfully fit. It's a constant practice, depending on what your challenge is. Guaranteed that the people who are listening and the people who are working in the state legislatures absolutely have high stress situations, whether it's from other legislators of different parties, whether it's from lobbyists, whether it's from constituents, whether it's other legislative staffers that you're frustrated with and not getting along with. There are always opportunities. The key is raise your awareness on what is your biggest challenge, and then to really consciously, if you know that you don't pause, that's the chance you need to do the pause pinch, so that when somebody comes and calls and says, I can't believe that your legislator is going to vote no on this, instead of saying, well, sir, and jumping right in and getting defensive, you pause and take a breath and think, okay, what's the best way I can show up right now? How can I respond that will connect with this person instead of make them further get defensive or angry? And then act from that place. And maybe you can calmly say, oh my gosh, sir, I can hear, it sounds like you're really frustrated and you disagree with the vote that my boss is going to take. I'd love to hear, what do you disagree about it? And what's your opinion? And you can respond thoughtfully and have a dialogue instead of being on autopilot. So there are a lot of opportunities if you're paying attention and looking for them.
Well, I've been on the other end of those phone calls so many times, particularly when I was a newspaper editor. I think that's good advice because the worst thing you can do is just start arguing with someone. And most of the time, people in those situations, they just want to get it off their chest. They want to say their piece. They don't really expect you to change what you've done. They want to make sure that you know their point of view.
Oh, 100%. And to that point, I think that's where we're pausing to think before acting is critical. And I know when I was working in the senator's office, one of the things I would notice is exactly what you said, somebody calls in and they're angry and they say, I didn't get my VA check or, whatever it is. If the staff person went right to the content before connecting first and said, well, sir, that's actually a federal issue and we are state, then I don't care. My tax dollars pay your salary, and then they escalate. They just want to be heard. And so if you can connect and say, oh, wow, that sounds really hard. That sounds frustrating. I can understand why you're upset. And you match their energy and you connect with them first before going to the content of whatever the message is. Yeah, they're going to be more likely to calm down and to not escalate. That's the power of handling yourself thoughtfully.
Let me ask you about coaching. You're an extraordinarily experienced coach, and there's an awful lot of coaching that goes on in the legislative world. What are your tips as someone who has so much background in this?
Coaching is so powerful. And the one tip that I want to start with is that coaching is not mentoring. And a lot of people who haven't trained and got certified and really studied coaching think that coaching is about giving advice and helping the person to fix and solve their problem. But indeed, coaching is really about help. You hold the other person as the expert and you get curious and you ask questions and you hold up the mirror. And in that new awareness, then you help them design some specific actions on how they're going to move forward. In mentoring, if I'm, and both have incredible value, but they're different. If I'm coming to you, Ed, as a coach, I'm holding you as the expert and you say, oh, I'm so frustrated. I don't know what to do. I'll say, well, what's frustrating about this relationship? And what would it look like if it was less frustrating? And what's the gap between what is frustrating now and that vision of having a stronger relationship? And what have you already tried? Whereas if I'm mentoring you, I'm the expert. I've been there. I've done this. Let me give you advice. Here's what you should do. Go and talk to this person and say this. Don't say that. They both have value. But I find that most people default to fixing, solving, teaching, telling, giving advice, mentoring. And the power of coaching is that usually people do know the answer if they're just given the right space and the right questions to think about it and reflect. And then the advantage of that is oftentimes the solution that they come up with is better and they're more committed to it because they came up with it themselves.
Darcy, what else do you want to share with the listeners? What are the other things you're going to talk about in Indianapolis?
The keynote that I'm going to be delivering is fascinating, and it's talking about working together despite differences and how do you build your flexibility. And flexibility is one of the 6 practices of being thoughtfully fit. So I spoke at NCSL in 2021 in Florida on the core and thoughtfully fit and the pause, think, act. This one is going to be a little different, and it's going to really focus on how do you stop trying to change others. Somebody frustrates you, and a lot of times we have people come into coaching. They're like, okay, here's what I want to work on today. How can I get my boss to be different? How can I get my colleague to change? Flexibility is stretching to accept that others are different than you, and that's okay, and not wasting your energy being angry that they aren't the way you think they should be, or worse, wasting energy trying to change them to get them to be the way you think that they should be. So we're going to really be exploring the power of acceptance and forgiveness and flexibility, in particular when somebody has a different opinion than you, which happens all the time when you're working in this industry.
I want to close this out by going back to the opening of our conversation. I've talked to a number of people on this podcast who've gone through major traumas, and invariably they all say that they're different afterward. Maybe not better or worse, maybe those aren't the words they use, but different, that their perspective is different. How they approach the world is different. And I wonder if that's true for you.
100%. It's almost as like you've interviewed people before who have experienced trauma. Yeah, I am more compassionate. I'm more resilient. I'm stronger. I have a deeper relationship with my daughters. I have found the deep power of forgiveness in a situation that seemed unforgivable. And I'll say if there are people who are listening who have been through or going through something that is challenging or hard or even traumatic, that if it feels like you'll never be at that place. That's how I felt for a long time. John Lennon said, everything will be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, it's not the end. And I think if you can keep working through your challenges and keep raising awareness and finding a support system, continue to pause and think before acting, you can transform your challenges into really incredible, powerful learning situations to grow and become better.
That's a great note to end on, Darcy, and thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Ed.
I've been speaking with consultant and coach Darcy Luoma, who'll be speaking to the Legislative Staff Breakfast at NCSL's Legislative Summit in Indianapolis in August. Thanks for listening. You can check out all the podcasts from the National Conference of State Legislatures by searching for NCSL Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Tim Story, NCSL's CEO, hosts Legislatures, The Inside Story, where he focuses on leadership and legislatures. The Our American States podcast dives into some of the most challenging public policy issues facing legislators. On Across the Aisle, host Kelly Griffin tells stories of bipartisanship. Also check out our special series, Building Democracy, on the history of legislatures.